Hello and welcome, especially to all of the children from the first Holy Communion class. You're very, very welcome here. I have a story to tell you this week. It's a story about Abraham and Sarah and the great family. But before I tell the story, I'd like to light the first candle on our Advent wreath. As you may know, we've just begun the season of Advent. And Advent is a really special time. It's a time when we prepare to enter into the mystery of Christmas. So we'll take a little time to light this candle. And as I light this candle, I want you to get ready. Get ready to listen to this story very carefully. Light the Advent candle one, now the waiting has begun. We have started on our way, time to think of Christmas Day. Candle, candle burning bright, shining in the cold winter night. Candle, candle burning bright, fill our hearts with Christmas light. So, are you ready? To tell this story, I brought our desert bag. Some amazing and wonderful things happened in the desert, so we need to know what it was like. But we can't go to visit the desert to do that. So this is just a small piece of the desert. The desert is a dangerous place. It's always shifting and moving. So it's easy to get lost in the desert. There's very little water in the desert, so you can get very thirsty there. And if you don't find water, you can die. There's very little growing in the desert, so there's little food there. During the day, the sun is scorching hot. And at night it gets very cold. When the wind blows, the sand stings you. So people have to wear a lot of clothing in the desert to protect them from the scorching heat of the sun, the cold at night, and the wind. The desert is a dangerous place. People only go there when they have to. After the great flood, the descendants of Noah spread out to the four corners of the earth to fill it with life again. The people settled oftentimes alongside rivers. At first they settled in villages, and after some time they began to build cities. One of the greatest and most ancient of these cities was called Ur. The people who lived in Ur believed in many gods. They believed there was a god of the sky and the sun, a god of the land, and a god of the rivers and the sea. They believed there was a god in every tree, every stone, every flower. Their world was alive with God's. But there was one family who believed that all of God was everywhere. They didn't know this for sure, but that is what they thought. Abram and Sarai were part of that family. And when the time came for them to take a journey away from the city of Ur and go to another place, they weren't sure if God would be there. So they wondered what the new place would be like. They set out on their journey towards Haran with their sheep and their donkeys. Even the older people in the family and the children went too. At night they slept in tents, and by day they followed the great river Euphrates. The river showed them the way, and it gave them water to drink, and water for their animals too. It was a very long journey. When they came close to the city of Haran, they met other people coming in the opposite direction, so they knew they were nearly there. And then they arrived. After they had settled there for a while, Abram sometimes went out to the edge of the desert. He looked out across the desert and up to the sky. And God came so close to Abram, and Abram came so close to God, that Abram knew what God wanted him to do. God wanted Abram to move to another place. So Abram went. He took Sarai with him, and their goats and their sheep and many helpers. They also took their tents, and Abram's brother Lot came with them too. This time they had no river to follow, and no river that gave them water to drink. They walked across the desert until they came to a place called Shechem. Abram climbed a hill there and prayed to God. And God was there. So Abram built an altar there to mark the place. And they continued on their journey. Next they came to a place near Bethel. And Abram prayed to God there too. And God was there. So Abram built another altar to mark that place. Now Abram knew that God was not just there or there or there. All of God was everywhere. Abram and Sarah continued on their journey towards Hebron. Eventually, they settled in a place near the oaks of Mamre. One night, God called Abram out into the desert. Abram looked up to the sky, and God came so close to Abram, and Abram came so close to God, that Abram knew what God was saying. God told Abram that he would be the father of a great family, and Sarai would be the mother. The members of that great family would be as many as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand in the desert. Abram laughed. He was getting very old, and so was Sarai. What God had promised just seemed impossible. But God told Abram to change his name to Abraham, and Sarai was to change her name to Sarah. Then one day, 3 strangers came from the desert. Abraham was sitting outside his tent, so he invited them in. Sarah mixed 3 measures of flour, which is a lot, and she gave them bread and meat to eat, and milk and water to drink, as that was the custom at the time. The strangers told Abraham that he would soon be father to a son. Abraham laughed. And Sarah, who was outside the tent but heard, laughed too. They were just too old. The 3 strangers went on their way. And do you know what happened? Abraham and Sarah did have a baby. And they called their baby Isaac, which in their language means laughter, because they laughed so much, they were so happy. When Isaac grew up, Sarah was very old. She died, and she was buried in a cave near the oaks of Mamre. Abraham was very sad and lonely. He missed Sarah very much, but there was still one thing that he wanted to do. He sent his most trusted servant back to the land where his family came from, to find a wife for Isaac. When the helper reached that land, he went to a well to drink. Rebecca was there. She gave him water to drink, and she helped him to give water to his animals. Rebecca was very courageous. She was also very kind. She brought him back home to meet her family. He told Rebecca and her family about Abraham and Sarah and the great family. Rebecca decided she would like to be part of that family, so she returned with him across the desert, past Shechem, past Bethel, and on towards Hebron. Isaac saw them coming and went to meet them. Isaac and Rebekah were married. Abraham was now very old and full of years. he died and was buried beside Sarah in the cave near the trees. Isaac and Rebekah had children, and their children had children, and their children had children, and on it went for thousands and thousands of years until your grandparents had children, and then your parents had children, and now you are part of that great family which has become as many as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand in the desert. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story.